Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. This is going to be a video that deals with research reports, and then along with that, insights and recommendations. So let's start this video lecture by talking about the shifts in research reporting. So we're looking more now for insights rather than data sharing, right? So just telling people the findings, yeah, I guess there's some, there is some value to that. There's some use to that, but not the use that somebody would get if you can kind of provide insight. And maybe that's insight they can draw themselves from hearing you or listening to your presentation or watching it or whatever. But maybe it's not. So maybe it needs to be kind of spelled out, if you will. Certainly web-based enhancement now, there's a lot of technology and technological functionality now that enables us to connect with people all over the world. You know, I've seen presentations where people were in like co-presenters were in different countries, and they were able to do it seamlessly. Audience-centric planning versus data-centric planning. I think that's probably a shift we've seen. It used to be that, the report itself was sort of the central aspect, which I understand. I mean, I get that. I'm sure, as I'm sure do you. But it wasn't, maybe the audience wasn't considered. So, maybe they were talking about things that were just way over people's heads, and they weren't necessarily very good at explaining them. And automation, there's a lot of things now you can do, certainly with research reporting, thinking about like for example, data visualization. You can click a button or two in Tableau and suddenly you have, a nice graphic that you could use for a presentation. Excel can do that, not to the same level as Tableau, but Excel can do some of that stuff too. So now we're looking more at the audience, right? So the audience composition, who's making up the audience? Is it technical people? Perhaps it's non-technical people. Um, what is or well, I should say what is their knowledge of the research question? What are their predispositions regarding research? Maybe they understand the research process, maybe they don't. If you ask 10 people what they think research means, you'll probably get 20 different answers, not even 10. The recommendation effects, how do your recommendations potentially affect them? Because if it's affecting them in a bad way, then obviously they're going to find reasons to kind of poo-poo what you've done. Desired audience effect, you want the audience to engage, be interested in, engage, buy into your research, be interested in it as you present it. And there may be supplemental purposes. So research predispositions. So, this could hurt you or help you, right? Attitudes and beliefs, selective perception, agreement or disagreement, clarity or confusion, experience, and perhaps the biggest one there is openness to change. Because a lot of times, you might be presenting something that's perfectly factual and it's, maybe something that's going to help the company, but it may not be good for like one area, one department, one segment. It may, or maybe they have to cut back. Maybe, they lose budget. There's sort of like real world implications and, you're just presenting what you found. And again, so long as you're presenting it from the standpoint and the platform of this is what I found, this isn't biased, I haven't skewed this, then you may still run into those challenges, even as and when you report it very objectively. And audience biases. So, anchoring bias, people are, kind of want to maintain the status quo. Confirmation bias. It may be that they may have their own idea as to what the problem is and how it can be fixed, and that's what they want to go with. Conformity bias. Sometimes, people just want to conform. They just want to fit in. So sometimes you might see, and you kind of see this in group settings. Sometimes people just want to kind of go with the group. You've probably heard that that term, the old term groupthink. That's definitely a real thing. Survivorship bias, kind of what I was alluding to, earlier. It's, is this going to affect me detrimentally? And if it is, then, yeah, I can't say that, but I need to try to find a way to, shoot this thing down. And again, loss aversion bias kind of speaks to the same thing. So the report structure, the report could be oral only, written only, or oral plus written. Generally speaking, now it's unless it's something very small, which could be oral only. Most times it's going to be oral uh, plus written, right? So certainly, or oral plus written whenever you're doing a presentation, right? Somebody's typically talking, maybe one individual or a group's talking, and they've got the visual aids up, maybe the PowerPoint, or they've got some kind of, hopefully nothing too technical, because that can be a problem in and of itself, which I'll talk about later on. Report titles, descriptive study, you could call it something like, just as an example, training and worker productivity in branch X. So perhaps that's something to do with banking. Correlation study, the relationship between relative national inflation rates and household purchases of brand X in international markets. So again, looking at those correlations. And then a causal study, these would be less common. The effect of various motivation methods on retail sales associates, attitudes, and performance. So, just sort of give you an idea as to, what these things might be called. Now, the role of support materials. So the role of support materials, again, think about those like visual aids I was kind of referencing. One would be to create and hold audience interest. What nobody wants to see or endure, during a presentation is somebody just talking, talking, and talking and talk, right? Um, Evidence that influences audience belief, right? So presenting things in ways that people say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I believe that's probably accurate. Clarify the researcher's insights. So as much as it's nice to be able to say, this is what I found, this is what we found, you want to have some sort of, to the extent possible, you want to have some demonstrable evidence presented to, probably in the visual aid. And then I would say emphasize an actionable insight or insights. Like, let's pluralize that, right? Let's, you know, what what's the point of this presentation? It's not just to tell you that there's a problem and this is what we found, but there's got to be some takeaway, right? There's got to be something that we're now going to do about this, ideally about the problem, that's going to help everybody move forward. Content and style. You know, jargon, language level, and tone. Certainly jargon, that can be a big one. I work in a very technical field, accounting and finance, and I've sat in meetings where, accounting people have talked, finance people have talked, and the only people that understand them around the table are the finance and accounting people. And, I take a sneaky look around the room and I can tell that, yeah, people nodding their head, everybody's smiling and looking engaged, but you can tell half these people, they have no idea what that person's talking about. So I generally say avoid jargon. Um, keep the language level to, again, this speaks to it being more like audience centric than, necessarily like material or data centric. Um, and also a tone, like a friendly, warm tone's always good. It kind of helps to engage people, to kind of draw those people in. Practice alleviates anxiety. Yes, indeed. Public speaking is definitely one. If you ask, if you ask 10 people what their number one fear is, I would almost guarantee you would hear public speaking, probably a time or two. Um, so yeah, go through the steps. Prepare your speech mentally, physically, and logistically. I mean, it doesn't take away all the nerves, but it does make you feel. It kind of defrays those nerves. It alleviates them because you feel like you're better prepared. Memorize the opening and closing to cement the audience rapport. So generally, like I try to start on with something funny and then try to end with something funny. The more you practice, the greater your credibility will be. And then know and meet your audience. If you have a few minutes before the presentation starts, usually when a meeting's starting, like no one just, it's not like everybody shows up at once, right? You might have a few minutes to go around, introduce yourself. If you don't know people, have a minute, ask them how so and so's doing. It's a good way to calm your nerves. Is sort of helping you more so than helping them. Speaker behaviors to avoid. Yeah, vocal. Don't speak too softly and don't speak too rapidly. A lot of times people just want to get through it, so they speed up to the point where people just, they struggle to follow them. You want to vary your volume, tone, and rate of speaking. That's important. Fill pauses with things like, those are things that you want to avoid. Be intentional and be specific about the words you use. With respect to physical, rock back and forth, pacing around without purpose. Now, I will say this: I don't think there's anything wrong with moving around during a presentation. I certainly do that. But just kind of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and that can almost become a little distracting. Fiddle with things like hair, jewelry, clothing. That's usually a sign that somebody's nervous. Staring into space rather than engaging eye contact. then of course that leads nicely into the next one, fail to make eye contact. And move the cursor without purpose, because you're moving the cursor around, and people are looking at the cursor, and maybe they're not paying attention to what you're focusing on. All right, so that was just a quick video on kind of some do's and don'ts, and some helpful tips, I hope, on presenting research. As always, I will see you all in another video. Take care.